Yeah, that's cool. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. My name is Brandon Clark, and thank you very much for coming to the Ableton workshop. We're going to learn all kinds of fun stuff, but I'm going to first start out with just a basic overview of how to navigate through Ableton Live, which is a beautiful piece of software used for production and performance, sound design, and anything that you want it to do. Gosh darn it. So first off, at the top we just have our drop down menu, and this is how we're going to be navigating through all the stock Ableton effects, instruments, samples, third-party VST plugins, and anything that you want to bring in here. So up top we have our instruments, and we'll go more into depth with these. It's going to be a very fuzzy screen. The drum rack and collision and other instruments that we'll be using. MIDI effects, which of course will just be used on MIDI instruments. Everything from arpeggiators to organizing scales and stuff like that. And then we have the audio effects, and most of the effects processing that I do is native to Ableton because it makes it really user-friendly for mapping things and creating effects groups and stuff like that to get the sound that you're after. Below that we have the third-party plugins right here, which we can go into how to set that up if you want to use other third-party plugins such as Massive or anything Native Instruments or stuff like that. Up here we have just 3 different navigational folders. These are going to be for everything from finding drum samples or things that you have like that, recordings, but also stock Ableton presets like different grooves, which Ableton Live has a really fun groove engine to where you can add swing to all of your MIDI clips and as well as your audio clips, and you can extract the groove from a song. You can just pull in a song that you like the groove of, right click extract groove, and then that'll actually put it into this thing right here, which is called the groove pool, and then you can apply that to MIDI and audio, which is pretty fun. So I'm going to use this third folder down here to scroll through samples to show you guys how to program drums, and then from there we'll probably get into some effects processing and things of that nature. Woo! Woo! You guys excited or what?
Yeah, boy.
Oh man. So I'm going to start out by just grabbing the drum rack. You can click your MIDI track, or if you need to create one, you can just go up to create, and from here you can create effects returns as well as MIDI tracks and audio tracks. So we already have a MIDI track up here. So we can either double click the drum rack, or everything in Ableton you can just drag and drop. If you're ever curious about if something can go somewhere, just drag and drop it and it'll most likely work. Even if you want to go so far as to, you have your drum rack where you can have these different drum samples in these different cells, but you can also grab things like the sampler, which we'll go more into, and put that on an individual drum cell. And from there you have the flexibility of the sampler in one individual drum cell, and sending that one MIDI note. So I'm going to scrap that because we can just start with drums. And everybody has their own way of finding their personal preference of what drum sounds they like, but just for the sake of example, I have a few kicks. That's not a kick. There's a kick. I like me that one, gosh darn it. So I'm going to pull that right there. And then when you drag and drop it, it doesn't always have the actual waveform out. So if you double click, then this comes out. From here you can completely dial in everything from the transposition of the actual drum cell here. Here, let's send some, that'll make it easier. So we can transpose it, drop the pitch of it. At default, Ableton is going to cut off the release of each drum sample, or any sample that you pull into the drum rack. So from there you can release it all the way if you want to play the whole sample, or dial it in like that. But depending on how long your MIDI note, it's going to either play a short segment of it or play the whole thing. So we got a kick, get another kick to layer it with. Drag and drop that one there. Let's get a hi-hat. So when you send the MIDI note, you can see it flashing inside of the drum rack. So from there you can tell what note you're actually sending, and then drop in what sample you like there. So That there's good. That might be fun on a latter day. Let's do that. Cool. Drag that over there. Now I'm going to get a snare. I'm going to get that because I'm into sounds like that, right? Uh-huh. Okay, cool. So now I have some sounds that I can start organizing and sequencing. There's a few different ways you can go about doing that. But before I do, I'm just going to put a compressor on there, and just like the instruments and MIDI effects, you can just drag and drop that onto there as well. If you hit Apple R, you can name it. I'm going to name it drums, just to stay organized. And we'll go more into compression later, but I'm just going to make these drums a bit more present by pulling down the threshold, make the attack come in a bit quicker, and then add a bit more compression to it. So now they sound a bit more present. Depending on your genre that you're trying to do, or just your creative style in general. Oh yeah.
Did you just put compression on that whole drum rack?
Yes, I did.
The same compression?
Yeah,
Okay.
I did.
All right.
So you can drag and drop anything onto these sample cells. Like say I wanted to EQ my kick, I can just drag specifically onto that sample cell and then find where I want to dial in for the kick. So I'll get kind of a tighter cue
Okay.
and find a nice. So I'm going to boost around 65 hertz just to give it some more of that oomph. But if you click on a different drum sample cell, then you're going to see that there isn't anything there. But I put at the end of the chain, I put the compressor, so it's going to be affecting all the drums on there. So that's a bit lighter on the CP load, as well as just a personal preference for compressing drums. It's going to vary between genre to genre, but just wanted something immediately more present. So with MIDI you can quantize, which just means snapping to a note, snapping to eighth notes, quarter notes, whatever you want to do. Sometimes in the creative process, if you just want to lay down a rhythm and decide the groove or swing of it later, you can quantize and snap it to a grid. So now I can just go up here to edit, go down to record quantization, and then from here I could choose the type of quantization that I like. I'm just going to go with 16th notes. Up here at the top we can tap the tempo that we want, or we can actually just grab it up and down or type in what tempo we want. I'm going to be cliche and just go 90. And then right here we have the metronome that we could turn on and off. So I'll just make a quick drum loop. And the way that this is going to work, there's many ways you could go about doing it. I'm going to actually punch in and punch out sort of in the fashion of a loop pedal, like a guitarist would when he's punching in and punching out, to create my own loop for sequencing these drums. Another way that you could go about doing it is actually double clicking the cell, and then it creates a blank MIDI scene, a MIDI loop here, and then we could choose the length for it. So I'm just going to go 4, and then we can visually see that coming around. And then I could wait for it to come back around and then just start punching in some notes and it'll loop it. So it sounds about right for me. It's pretty robotic and locked in for right now, but I'm just going to go ahead and name this loop 1. And then from here, I'll go more into grooves and how we can apply those in here. So I'm going to bring this down a little bit. And I'll pull up our groove pool here. And then there's some presets that Ableton has for grooves that are separated between different samplers, like the MPC, SP1200. It also has genre-specific ones, like hip-hop. I can grab New York cut, make these drums a bit looser. We can kind of maybe grab a couple other ones, maybe grab a SP one, and see how these sound with it. Everything's just drag and drop into that loop pool here. The screen's a bit over here. I'm going to drop that down. Grab a couple of those. So we can test that out. Down, like that. So now we can actually minimize this groove pool. We can set the actual percentage of how much we want all these to take effect, I'm just going to leave it at 100% for now, for the sake of demonstration, so you can really hear the contrast in between applying groove to all these. So I'll double click on my scene here. So over here you have the grooves, and from here you can choose from everything that we put into the groove pool. If you want to extract a groove from something, it's going to go into that groove pool. So I'm going to apply the New York cut there. Let's try the SB one. Gives it a more humanized feel. I'm going to turn it off for now and copy this loop, copy it below. This is just a creative process that I go through, so I'm not really getting rid of anything. If I have a base idea for something that I like, I'll copy it and move on to the next one. And then if I don't like the new additions that I do, I can always move back and still have the original one. So I'm going to throw in some hi-hats right now. Make sure overdub's on here. So those are a bit loud for me. I'm going to go in and click on that drum sample right there, pull the volume down a bit. Now when we apply the groove, it'll take a more obvious effect because of the hi-hats. So I kind of like that. I'll probably keep that for now. Come in here and name that loop 2, just to stay organized. Now there's two main different views in Ableton, and you have the session view, which is where we're at right here. So we have a vertical way of looking at things. Say we have a guitar here or something of that nature. Name that. Create more tracks. Like Apple T would make an audio track, and everything's displayed vertically. You can either hit tab or go over here and click to change the arrangement view. And some people do most of their arrangement in here to begin with. Some people do all their production in there, and a lot of people don't touch it at all until even the last phase. I typically get all of my ideas out here like a canvas, and then I don't have to commit to anything really. I can just get a bunch of drum loops, a bunch of different melodic ideas, and then kind of mix them together afterwards in the order that I like. So you can either drag and drop everything from here to that view. So drop it on the corresponding drum track right here. It's elastic, so we can stretch it out, and you can visually count the bars for how everything is. Or if we want, which is really fun too, is hit record, and then from here you can just launch clips and match things together, and it's going to actually record it all out in real time. You can stop it, and then that's still elastic as well.
IG, I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Can you sum the influences of two different grooves onto one drum thing, or can you only apply one kind of groove to one?
You can apply one, but the flexibility that you have within the groove pool to decide how that groove is acting is all in here, so you can have it react on 16th notes, 8th notes, quarter notes, as well as the randomizing of where the actual swing is going to be placed, how it's going to affect the velocity of it, and how that's quantized in. So if you get kind of a loose idea, just like you would pull in a synth and be like, okay, this preset is kind of what I'm after, and then you dial in your preset, it's kind of similar to that. So you can dial in exactly what you're after within the groove, in the groove pool.
Should that pretty much take care of what Chance is asking?
Yeah,
okay.
it would. So you wouldn't necessarily want to stack multiple grooves anyways. But if you did have a bunch of things in this groove pool, and you had, like, you separated your kick and pattern and your snare pattern, and that was on one, a new track apply a completely different groove to that. So between the flexibility of that, you can dial in what you're after. So we got those drums there. Whenever you're sending MIDI messages or you're trying to record audio, in this case it's a MIDI track, so I'm going to record enable this. Now it can receive the MIDI messages to there, and that's how I was printing things before. If we had an audio interface set up to plug in a guitar, it would be the same thing for here. You You go to your ins and outs right here, and then you could choose get what you're getting audio from. So you'd be getting it from the first or second input of your interface, depending on what you're trying to do and how it's plugged in. But there's this button up here. A couple of these come on and off as you're doing things. One of them is overdub, so you can kind of, if your track's record enabled, you can get some ideas out like that. And then if you do end up wanting to print something, like say I wanted to drag another snare, we can come over here and layer that snare with something like that. Super platinum drums.
Platinum drums.
So say I wanted to layer that, and I'm thinking, yeah, that has potential. I could print those MIDI messages over it. Just go overdub, begin my loop. If I want to visually look at it, I can go like that, and then now I'm we can also see where those notes are going and then just double click and draw it in. So if you don't have a MIDI controller next to you, you can still have a grand old time. I might actually leave out those claps for the last ones there just to give it a bit more variation. So I like where the notes are out there, but I'm going to probably turn that down quite a bit there. So I'm going to hit something called spread, which is going to subtly detune the left and the right channel, and that can also utilize more of the stereo field by kind of making it seem like it's spread out more. There's a few different ways you could do that. You could create a couple drum sample cells of the same sample, program the same note at the same time, and then pan one off hard right and hard left. But this one I want to just be a bit more subtly detune the left and right channel to kind of blend it in more with the initial click snare that I had.
You can also do a mono to stereo delay and have one side 0% mix and the other side 100% mix.
Yeah, and if you wanted to do that, you could just drag and drop an actual delay onto that sample cell right there, take it off a sync, and then dial in how many milliseconds. And actually, a lot of the effects in Ableton have the ability for you to EQ exactly what part of the frequency spectrum you want to affect with it. So say you want the delay to just affect about, 2.7 hertz. So a fun way to get unique drum sounds is to just mess with dragging and dropping effects on the individual sample cells, as well as effect sends, which I'm going to get into right now. There's a few different ways that you can go about putting effects on your instruments, whether it's drums or guitars. You can put it directly on the track itself like I did with the compressor, or we can use these effect sends over here, and they of course correspond to each other. So say I want some reverb on effect send A, I'll drag and drop it onto there, dial in the reverb that I want. For the sake of example, I'll just do something pretty decayed out here, and then it's not affecting it until I want it to. And then the cool part about it is you have your dry and wet on your effect. If you were to put that directly onto the track itself, like here I'll copy the reverb here, if I put it directly onto the track itself, when I pull it down the dry and wet, it doesn't ring out, it just immediately shuts it off. But if I do that with an effect send over here, after I bring it back down, the delay or the reverb or whatever effect you're using will carry out until it's naturally going to dissipate. So it's not as abrupt. So it's really fun for transitions and stuff like that. It's really fun for when you're playing live, if you want a MIDI map to these knobs, and while you're performing, if you twist it and then you pull your effects back down, it's going to carry out, say you were echoing the delay on the snare or something like that. That'll continue as opposed to just being completely cut off when you pull the dry and wet back down. It's also fun because you can do effect sends, and then you're not completely processing the dry signal, so some of the dry signal is still coming through. So there could be a more creative way of spicing up your drums. I really like grain delays, so I'm going to grab a grain delay and put it on effect send B. And since it's drums, I don't want to affect the timing of it too much, so I'm going to take it off of sync and just bring it down to about 6 milliseconds here. And that's just a personal preference, just from toying around and doing some sound design. I'm going to dirty it up before that. The flexibility of being able to control which order you put your effects in the effects chain can have a huge impact on the sound itself, but it's really easy because it's just dragging and dropping, as opposed to if you had a pedal board for a guitar, you'd have to unplug it and put your reverb after your distortion or whatever. So that's why Ableton is also really fun for using it for bass effects, guitar effects, live vocal effects, and being able to take it live like that. Right out the box, my creative process for organizing ideas is pretty much ready to go on the stage right away too, because I have all these clips, and depending on how you want to perform live, you can launch your clips, do live effects processing and stuff like that. It's really streamlined how it is to perform and how it is to produce. It's making them more the same thing, instead of having to use a different program to do that or other methods. So I'm gonna mess with some of this over here. I'll play my beat loop here. Let's add a little bit of it. So that's subtle, I like that. Gives it a bit more flavor. I'm gonna drag and drop a reverb onto this here. Solo your actual cells here. So that was a bit too much reverb there. Pull the decay down. Now I will unsolo it. And now we have a rough drum loop that we can mess with to get some other ideas out. And depending on the genre or whatever you want to do, if you're trying to make some hip hop and chop up some samples, there's lots of ways you can go about doing that. If you're trying to just play with synthesizers and sequence them, you can make a MIDI track. Let's say we want to pull out the operator, for example. Just do the basic operator. Maybe get a bass line going on here. And now instead of creating the cell and then sequencing into the cell, I'm just going to use it kind of like a loop pedal and sequence myself in here and throw some random notes out. So now I looped in and out and it printed those. And what I pulled out here was the operator, so I have 4 different oscillators. I'm going to introduce another oscillator. You can change the waveform over here. I'm going to give it a square.
What does that just change there?
How that oscillator is being affected, the velocity. So I'm just pulling it down a bit, the Q. Give it more of like a deeper sound. You can also make it a bit grittier. So it's a good way to dial in tone, like undertone for bass or keys or whatever you're trying to do. Gives it a bit more character. Right now I'm gonna dirty it up with a little bit of white noise. And you can actually draw how you want your waveform to be, and it will react in real time and give you a visual display of what you're drawing in here. So there's my white noise. I'll bring that up a little. So that's grimy. And the fun part about messing with loops and getting ideas out, especially if you don't necessarily have something exactly that you want in mind, or you do and it turns out people want it to be faster or slower, if you're trying to incorporate vocalists or other instruments, you can just grab the tempo slow it down or speed it up. So we got a cool bass tone there, and from there we can add other synths, guitars, or whatever we feel like doing. I'm gonna actually start chopping up a sample right now. So I'm gonna Command T will create a new audio track over here. I'm just gonna Command R, name it sample. Sometimes you misspell things and don't mind. So I got some other samples in here. I think I got some cliche stuff. Let's see what we got here. Cool. So that's some windy stuff. That's kind of cliche for me, so I'm going to pull that in. And then if it's a shorter loop, you can set it to try and warp that to get it fit to the tempo. It's not always going to be perfect, but from there you can warp things how you like, and I'll get more into that later. But for now, let's start that over. I'll create a warp marker and slide it over a bit. Say I want that to come down on the beat. I'm going to double click that and just scoot it over right there. I like that as a loop, so I'm actually just going to cut that off right there. I sent a little bit of the reverb to it. Spread it out a bit. Gee, that sounds like wind. So I'm gonna name it that. To bounce out the loop a little bit, I'm gonna create an effect send and just put a delay on there. So when the loop bounces back around, it'll still have the previous chunks of wind to carry the boot. So I'm gonna put a C right there. So to give that a little bit more movement, I'm gonna put a compressor on it. And this drop-down menu is the side chaining. So from here, I can use anything within here to trigger this compressor to act in a certain way. So I'm gonna turn side chaining on and have it get audio from something because it needs a source to be triggered with. So I'm gonna grab from the drums. I'm just gonna grab the actual kick. So if I'm playing, it'll light up. The good thing to do is actually name your drum samples. That just makes it easier when you start routing stuff and just in general for being organized. So I named it kick. If I come over here, I'm getting it from the kick. I'll pull the threshold down a bunch, so it's gonna have to keep up, pull the ratio up quite a bit, as well as the release. So now, so there's a texture you could use later. It's all part of the experimental process. Doing things that sound cool and things that completely suck. Let's name that suck. So let's grab another sample and I'll show another way of pulling in audio. There's some cool stabs in there, so I'm going to drag and drop that. And now I'm going to create a bunch of warp markers in here. And these are all going to be the points where after I slice it to a new MIDI track, they're going to come up as different MIDI notes so I can trigger them how I like and organize it. So I'll start playing this. I'm going to grab this one here. That'll be my first slice. I want that second one there. So for the sake of example, that's enough chops for me now. So I have all these custom warp markers that I placed just by double clicking on the transients or wherever I wanted these different chops to be. Now if I right click it, I can go slice to a new MIDI track, and then it gives you a few options you could do this. You can slice just randomly every half note, every eighth note, every bar or transient, but since I did my own warp markers and customize it, I'm just going to select that. There's a few presets that come in as well. You could do just a standard built-in one, which is just going to play the sample and do it like a traditional sampler. And there's some actual macro knob effects racks that come together, like a Peachy Fuzz is going to have some overdrive and delay and reverb and stuff like that to get more creative with what you're doing with your slices afterwards, which you can always apply those effects after you do the initial chopping, but that's a good way to get your feet wet. But hit OK, and then I'll slice it to this brand new MIDI track over here. It shows the MIDI where all these slices are done, but that's not really relevant to me because I'm just going to be triggering my own stuff in there. So I'm just going to get rid of the initial track there. Now if I hit this to record enable, I can actually so I have that I can go through. Cool. So now I can play my drums and just start sequencing stuff in. You can also stop it, tap the tempo of it. So let's go. So I'm just gonna go 77 for now. So there we go. So I got the tempo to kind of line up there. The velocity back up for those. So now you have the MIDI flexibility of organizing your samples out. I'm just going to call that idea. And then that is the actual MIDI for it. But what I can do if I want to turn that into audio to mess with it in different ways, there's a few different ways you can go about routing that MIDI into audio. One of them is just the ins and outs. You could tell it to get audio from that MIDI track right there. And I named it MIDI, so I'll grab that. I'll actually mute it for now just so it's not too loud. And then I'll record enable it. And now I can actually record that as an audio clip. Now I'll give it some extra space. Could have recorded it as a loop, but I'm going to wait. Cool. So I got a fun audio clip there. Lined up along there. Say I wanted to stretch this last one out. Actually just keep it like that. So let's scoop closer. So now we turn that into something that sounds quite a bit different. And then you can have something in mind when you're doing that sound design, or you can just completely mess around and hope for the best and have a good time doing it. But we have all these different clips right here, and we can launch them individually as clips, or we can launch them as scenes, which is going to launch it horizontally across everything that's there. And the way that these are all being launched in is with quantization. So you have your global quantization for how quick you want these loops to actually come in. If you want to make them bigger or smaller, you can go to options and then click smaller or larger launch quantization. But there's also a hotkey, which is command 1 or command 2. So if I want it to be a lot smaller, even smaller than that, or a little bit bigger, you can even have it be measures later that all these different clips will come in. You can apply that same ducking compression onto that weird sample. So it's all just personal preference, whatever you're trying to do as far as genre, and the way that it sets it up for how MIDI is working so closely to audio makes it really fun for routing everything from MIDI to audio, or using different triggers, either they're audio ones or MIDI ones, and then having the tempo flexibility to adapt to someone else or change it later just because you feel like you should. Questions? I kind of went on a rampage there. Any questions about things that I didn't necessarily cover?
I just read about velocity ramps for movements.
For the grooves?
Yeah, like actually creating, like, I know there's a way to stretch a ramp for, oh, we're talking about grooves. Sorry.
Oh, what were you talking about?
I was just talking about with like MIDI notes, like when you have a beat program and you want to change the velocity, if you have like snares.
Oh yeah.
And I know there's a way to like do quick ramps that are
so when you're using the drum rack and you're programming these drums in, if you do it with a live way of playing it, they're probably going to be different velocities, but when you draw them in, it's going to be all the way at 127, and you can pull those up and down, but they're not actually going to take immediate effect unless you go into the actual drum sample and then come over here, and then you have velocity at 0%, and you can turn that all the way up to 100 or however you want, and that's just the percentage of how each sample is going to react to the velocity itself, which is fun because you can not just have from 0 to 127, that's how hard your drum's going to hit. It can vary over time with this velocity right here, and it make drums sound more expressive or realistic or exactly.
Swing.
What's that?
Velocity is what makes swing.
This is just the velocity for how hard the note is hitting, not the placement of the note. So like
that has.
You're talking about like Dilla?
Yeah, we went into those grooves and stuff, and those really loose grooves, but he specifically was talking about the individual drum sample cell, and once you sequence some things out, how the velocity of how hard that note is hitting in, not really the placement of the note, which would be the swing or the groove. But some other DAWs, like programs like Reason, when you draw on your drums, they're actually going to react accordingly to how your velocity is. It took me a second to realize why it wasn't reacting to them that way, and that's because under each drum sample cell, you have to show how much velocity, how much you want it to react to the velocity that's programmed in there. So, was that what you're?
I was talking about something else.
Oh,
it's cool to go over.
You're just talking about velocity ramps.
There's a ramp. There's like a way to create a dotted line that like changes.
You hold down control.
Okay.
For within the MIDI clip?
Yeah, well, like, you know, instead of like, if you're trying to like, instead of dialing down individually, if you have like 100 like snare notes next to each other, you can like drag this dotted line. And then
Just drawing it in with the pencil?
Yeah. Oh, maybe it's.
You can draw it in with the pencil, and then it will. I swoop things in like that too, so you don't have to. Because if you're
then
not
automating the velocity, like change in velocity as
on Berlin?
Yeah, you could draw it in with the pencil, but if you don't have the pencil tool in, then you have to actually grab each one and do that. But it's really easy, just Command B for pencil and draw it in like that. But still, if you were doing that with a snare or something, you would need to click the snare and then set the velocity to how you want it to react to that velocity.
So, pretty much the last like 20 songs I've tried to make, like I've decided they all suck halfway through making them. So, what would your recommendations be? Like, I mean,
You can make stuff that did suck. You actually wouldn't encounter that problem at all.
yeah.
Which took me a while to realize.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Looking at the man in the mirror.
more like when you get it's kind of.
I know what you're saying, like hitting a
It's
block.
not really that they suck. It's just I didn't not really know where to take it from there.
Yeah, I hit creative blocks all the time, and
If you sometimes just putting it down and going and taking a walk or doing an excessive amount of over-the-counter medications or just sleeping it off and coming back when you are inspired, I am really against working on a song if I'm not really into it the whole time, because it should be fun even when you have to do things that are sort of tedious, like resampling and drawing in notes and stuff like that. It should be a fun process the whole time. But a good way to get over the creative block too is handing it off to someone else and collaborating, because that'll help you kind of further dial in your own style too. So you can bounce out your individual stems, or you can actually collect all. When it comes to saving in Ableton, you can just do a standard save, or you can collect all and save, and that's going to group all your external samples and different sounds you used and put it into there, and then you can just give someone the whole project folder, and if they have a current version of Ableton or one that you were using, then they can just pull it up and see what you have there.
Just have to
So-
mess with it for a while.
Yeah, just if you
Yeah, that
know
makes
other
sense.
people, like even the people in this room, that you want to just toss the session over to, and maybe even keep your own copy in case they change things that you don't really like.
Yeah.
You'll have that backup, but just give them the ultimate freedom to go into it. Because I know even on the end of receiving something, like whether it's a remix or just someone else's session, it's really fun to just have the ideas out there that they wanted and then tweak with them instead of starting completely from scratch and having an idea in mind for something to write. So that's a good way to get over it too. Or just watching tutorials, separating yourself from the computer, like going out and doing weird field recordings, and then sitting down and not even really writing a song, but just messing with those samples in interesting ways to use in different songs, and whether it's like field recordings of you hitting stuff or a weird creepy old man playing the sitar somewhere in Pike's Place.
Yeah.
Just taking things from your environment and then using programs to manipulate that and create something new out of it. Does that help at all?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. There's a couple of things in there that I thought that I think would help me out.
And I don't know, listening to things that really get you inspired, and then not trying to rip it off, but trying to replicate like a specific synth patch or a specific drum pattern or something that really gets you inspired. And then that from there, it probably won't sound just like it. It definitely might even sound not anything like it, but it will get you inspired again to do that. So start a new session, do something else. And feel free to put things down. The subjective part is knowing when to put things down. Like sometimes it gets to a certain point where you're just tweaking things way too much. So that's why sometimes I just turn my MIDI into audio, and then like say you program some drums that you really like and you just don't know what else to do. You kind of don't really like the song too much. Turn those drums into audio, and then just start separating little regions of the snares and like re-pitching them up or stretching them and doing things like that, and then running those through crazy effects and re-rendering them. Sometimes just re-bouncing down new versions of audio and MIDI can be really inspiring and trigger some new methods. Yeah?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Power to the people.
Yeah, bro.
Questions? You have questions?
Oh, not right now. Yeah, I have to go through.
Hallie? Barry?
I think mine actually might be a computer problem, but every time I'm resampling my audio for my song, it glitches part of the way through, and so I have to delete it and then just keep resampling it.
It's your buffer rate of your computer. What's your buffer rate at?
I've been changing it because of that.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, when you're recording live audio, like a guitar, and you don't want the latency in between our vocals,
Yeah.
you usually bring your buffer rate a lot lower.
Lower.
But that also you're kind of combating with your computer too, because it's like how much can your computer handle? Sometimes you even need to just let it breathe for a little bit and come back. But usually when you're resampling like synths or you're working with synths or EQing, a higher buffer rate's fine. Usually 500 or like 512 or something is really good for just not getting the latency, but still it doesn't glitch out when you're like trying to resample your own stuff. So yeah, try it at like 500. If not, try closing all your other applications, turn your airport off. The airport actually has a huge impact.
Yeah, I
on-
always turn that off.
Yeah. So,
What up?
how you doing?
How's your tutorial going?
You're on candid camera.
What up, Luke?
What's up, Josh?
Yeah, anything else? Trap?
No, I'm good.
No? You've just been waiting to walk out on this the whole time? Trying to find a polite time to?
No.
Alright, I think that's all. Thank you so much for all your cooperation, everybody. There'll be many more of these to come. And goodbye. That's my sign off.
Goodbye. Sign off, bro.